Hello, everybody. Thank you and welcome. Uh, Thank you for joining us for Science Connections, focusing on science and literacy today with Eric Cross and Susan Gomez-Zwiep. We're so excited to have all of you today. While we wait for people to join, please go ahead and drop in the chat. What's your name? Where are you from? Maybe what's your role in education? We'd love to hear from all of you.
Welcome, everybody. Let's take a look at the chat. Let's see. Do we see any familiar names in here? I think so. I want to see who's the furthest out. Um, I am in San Diego, California, where it's raining, which it rarely does. And Susan, where are you?
I'm in Long Beach, California, and it is also raining here, which is unusual for us as well, but it's lovely.
We don't get a lot of rain. Okay, here we go. Now the chat's going live. All right, we got Yvonne in Miami, Douglas in AZ.
Some Louisiana folks with us.
Lori, New Jersey. My dad's in East Orange, Jersey. A few folks.
Vegas showing up strong.
Is that Clark County? Is that Clark County that I see right there? Shout out to Clark County. There we go.
Ooh, New York City. Oh, Manitoba.
Winnipeg. Oh, it's snowing? Oh man. All right, we're all over it. Are we every once in a while there's international. Somebody just I think they wait till the end and they'll drop in, they'll say, like, I'm in New Zealand.
Yep.
We have any folks like that today, but maybe.
Drop the mic.
Yeah. I was like, you win. We'll send Ryan. We'll have Ryan send you the prize.
Expensive postage. Okay, well, it's been about 2 minutes after the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Again, thank you everybody for joining us for Science Connections today with the focus on science and literacy with Eric Cross and Susan Gomez-Zwiep. I'm going to go ahead and get us started with just a few helpful tips for this webinar. If you would like to enable closed captioning for this webinar, that is a feature that's available. You can just go ahead and click the closed captioning button in the bottom of your Zoom tray. Please feel free to participate and make comments in the chat at any point in time. We love to hear from you guys. We love to hear what your thoughts are and what's going on. So please drop that in there. We will be using the Q&A feature for this webinar though. So if you have any questions for Eric and Susan, please don't hesitate to drop those in the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we will get to them at the end of the webinar if there's time. You should receive a certificate of attendance and the recording from Zoom. So just keep an eye out on your email for that for the next day or two after the webinar. We get those out as soon as we possibly can. And with that, I'm going to introduce everybody to Eric and Susan. So Eric is the host of our podcast, Science Connection, and a current 7th grade science and technology teacher. He is a great STEM leader, both inside and outside of the classroom. We love Eric, he's so great. And then today we also have Susan, who started her career as a science educator for middle schoolers, and now constantly works to establish equity across the board all over the place. So Susan and Eric are great. We're so excited to have both of them today. I'm just thrilled to have both of them as speakers. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Susan and Eric.
Thanks, Ryan. Welcome everybody. Susan, you're a favorite here at Amplify. We have to fight with you between the science of reading and Science Connection. So thanks for being here after work and talking about science and literacy.
Super excited to be here. So
I wanted to start out. I'm in the classroom, and as you know, over the weekend, and for those of you who may not know, Susan and I were actually able to meet for the first time this weekend at the Exploratorium in San Francisco. It was the first time we got to meet face to face. Brought together a bunch of science educators and people who are in academia. And one of the things that came up for me was oftentimes I don't know what's happening in academia as far as all of the research that's going on into STEM education and things like that, because I'm in the classroom and the things that come up for me are Takis, Hot Cheetos, TikTok, and what other random things my 12 and 13-year-olds want to talk about. And so one of the first questions I wanted to ask you is, where are we at in the current research on literacy and science?
So First of all, very glad to be here. And when I was an 8th grade science teacher a couple of years ago, hot Cheetos were still huge. I'm glad to see they have are still making a appearance in middle school rooms.
They're timeless.
They're timeless. If it's okay, I'm going to share a visual for this part.
Please.
All right, let's see if I can, here we go. Because I like this visual kind of puts a lot of pieces together. Everybody see that okay? So what the where we used to a long time ago, but it's important to sort of acknowledge the origins of sort of the disciplines. We really saw language as something that was had to be developed first before it could be used. And so because of that, it was quite the barrier for students who, for a variety of reasons, weren't proficient in academic English. And we did a lot of things in efforts to improve their academic English to that limited access to science. And we've shifted the field in multiple ways, both in language, but also in science. And so this graphic really represents, I think, the way we now think about science, scientific sense making, and language. So we all know we start with phenomena now. So rather than telling students ideas and then proving how those ideas are correct by showing them a phenomena, we show them the phenomena and engage them in sense making to develop that understanding. Well, when we flip it, language becomes really central to both science sense making, but also communicating that sense making. So we have a phenomena and kids are going to engage in scientific sense making and they're going to use prior knowledge. So I love, this is just light reflecting off a mirror, right? We've all seen it. I don't have to, I can bring all these experiences I have about the various ways light has and has not reflected off different surfaces. I can do some investigations to really dig into areas of the phenomena that really made me wonder. And I'm going to engage with my peers, not just because it's a better way of learning, but because the practices really, really drive me to develop models and share them, develop explanations, engage in argumentation, communicate, and evaluate information. So within our practices, I need social interaction about ideas. And that really reflects how science is done. Scientists talk to each other. My good colleague, Maria Samani, always says, if I'm just doing science myself and I'm not talking to anybody, that's not science. That's just me in my head. So when we go to that social interaction, now what we're seeing is this language use. And the beautiful part is that we're really kind of expanding what we mean by language use. So because my prior knowledge is often embedded within a social language or a language that I use at home, I have to use that when I first engage with the phenomena. Otherwise, I'm limiting the resources that kids bring to the learning environment.
Susan,
And yeah,
can I pause on that?
sure.
It, would it be fair to say that then if a student's coming into the classroom and they're talking about science, but they're not using the big fancy words, right? Like that's okay. Because sometimes I've seen that gets shut down. Like they'll get corrected or something in maybe the beginning phase. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
That's it. And so that's why the classroom environment is really important. And we're starting to see, now that we've like sort of redefined what we think about language use and its place in sense making, now we're having to deconstruct classrooms and decenter traditional ways of learning that allow a kid coming in and talking about light and light reflecting in really non-scientific terms that are in fact quite useful in sense making. If you shut them down, now they're not going to tell you what they're thinking, and that's sort of the whole leverage point in teaching.
Right. And this seems like I, it, and I imagine many teachers, including myself, when I grew up, it was so many vocab lists and memorization of vocab words. And if you could memorize the vocab words, that was a huge chunk of what we were trying to do. And if you could do that, you would get a higher grade. But when I think if I had to learn science in my second language, I would be struggling with not only just the everyday vocabulary, but also this content specific vocabulary and then the language structure. So all of those things, but you would never actually know what I knew or what I was bringing to the table because the vehicle I was bringing over wasn't, I don't know, maybe wasn't as proficient or something.
Yeah, and Louisa asked in the chat, do we need to restate what they say using scientific vocabulary? And it's all, yeah, it's a great question because, and this is, I apologize because there are no easy answers here, right?
Mm-hmm.
If there were easy answers, we would have done it. We would have figured this out before now. But the real question is, where are you in that sequence of sense making? So if the student hears something, like says something and it's not scientifically accurate, but it has some semblance of an idea in there. It really is up to the community of learners in the room to negotiate what that means. And once that's negotiated and we have a common understanding of how we want to describe this thing, now I can label the heck out of it. So I used to teach genetics, right? Heterozygous, homozygous, heterozygous dominant, homozygous. We used whatever language the kids came up with. It was right. So that's language is socially negotiated. So within the confines of our room, they called them whatever they wanted to call them, but they were still describing the accurate thing. And then at some point I said, as they were fumbling over saying, well, there's a dominant and then there's a recessive. And as they were fumbling over these, I said, there's a term for that. Do you want the term? And they're like, God, could we please have the term? And that's what science vocabulary, what technical language should do. It should make it easier to communicate our ideas, but I can't use them until I have the ideas that I need to communicate. So it's really about where are you in the sense making? If you're at the very beginning where there hasn't been a lot of collaborative sense making, let them call it whatever they want to call it, as long as it makes sense to them and it's not offensive. Again, I taught middle school, all the way down to now we have some really sophisticated ideas and now we need some sophisticated language. So it depends where you are in that sequence of sense making, how much you adjust the language you allow in the room. Because
I found what you're saying so liberating as a teacher because I don't have to censor or modify what my students are sharing with me. What I could actually do, and I've kind of flipped this one time, this literally this week, in Amplify, there's this lesson in metabolism, Elisa Rodriguez, and she's tired. And the students have to come up with reasons as to why she's tired. And I have them make a word cloud and we put up on the wall, and the biggest answers come up, or the most frequently said answers come up biggest. And it's funny because some students put some things on there that, may not be things that you might say is from a scientific medical perspective. But one student said, she's thugging it out. She's thugging it out. And I was like, and I knew who did it. And when you see that, and in my brain, I went, there's a few directions I can go with this. And so what I said was, I read it and the student said, that was me. And I said, tell me more about that. And another teacher was in the room and they said, how you handled that? Like, you didn't shut him down. You didn't say, hey, we don't talk like that. And what it did is it opened up an opportunity. And then he started explaining what he meant by that. Now, there was a little 7th grade edge in there of trying to be funny and humorous, but he actually had a deeper thought inside of what he was trying to communicate there. And so it was great that he had, the comfort to share and communicate in a way that was natural to him. But because I felt comfortable not having to moderate the language that my student was using, I was okay to go there and just explore it further. So I feel like that kind of like is what you're talking about.
Yeah, 100%. And so because of like what you just described, getting kids to believe you is the trick. Getting kids to believe that it's safe to
Mm.
say what they're really thinking, the way they're thinking it in a classroom requires trust. It requires relationship building, in order for them to really tell you what it is they're thinking. Because if they're worried that about I'm supposed to say it in a particular way, that's where all their cognitive energy is going instead of talking about the science. So that's why we're starting to see a real shift in class. We're leaving the term classroom norms.
Mhm.
It used to be rules, and then they were norms, and now we're moving towards agreements, because all of this shift in the way we're thinking about language in a classroom means the classroom has to feel like it's the student's space, and they need to be involved in the agreements that they need in order to learn, to feel safe to learn. I mean, that's a crazy thing to say, but for a lot of students, they did not feel safe to learn.
This
They had,
seems like it's kind of getting into another aspect that we don't often see connections between is how you establish a community or safety in your classroom. And it seems like there's a connection between that and literacy development. Because for
Mhm.
me, what I hear is if I don't feel safe and comfortable going there and taking these risks, I am going to limit myself from developing language and fluency and all these other things because I don't want to become ostracized or teased or any of those things. So now I'm thinking about for me as a teacher, we do classroom agreements and norms, but usually it's for behavior management.
Yeah.
But we don't often think about that. That could actually enhance the learning in your classroom, like if you think about it one step further.
And one of the things that I think we all struggle with in the transitioning into full NGSS three-dimensional classrooms is, what do I do? Like, I'm the teacher. I'm no longer clear. I'm not giving the same type of directions. I'm definitely not lecturing the whole time. Not that you can't. And there's room for little mini things. Um, what do I do? And how do I make sure that kids are going where they need to go in order to reach my learning objectives, right? Like, if it's supposed to be all the student-centered stuff, what do I do? Well, you help them build that environment. You do still, I mean, if you had a kid who said something in that Wordle that was not based in an idea, it was truly that kid like trying to mess with you,
Mhm.
I mean, clearly there's still behavior issues that need to be attended to, but we're seeing that there's less of them when you can build these classroom spaces where you have agreements like we can share ideas even when we're not sure,
Mm.
which is very scientific because science is tentative. We think we know everything, and then somebody releases a paper for some new line of research, and now what we think we know changes. So science is tentative. So it should be a classroom norm that it's okay to share your idea even when you don't know, that our ideas are going to change and grow together, but to do that we need to talk to each other, we need to look at each other, we need to listen to each other. And in all of this, an agreement that we can do science in many different ways. When I'm engaged in sense making, I'm going to do it in a way that works for me. And when Ryan does it, he does it in a way that works for him. And when Eric does it, so like there's not a way to do science. We're engaged in this in a collaboration. And in classrooms with those types of agreements where kids are held accountable to each other is where this works best.
So if I'm a teacher listening right now, which I am, the two things that I'm taking away right now is there's actually a connection between my students' literacy development in science and the classroom community that I've helped create. And when I'm talking to pre-service teachers, I tell them that you have to be a thermostat, not a thermometer. A thermostat adjusts the temperature of the room, a thermometer reacts to it. And so if I don't create culture, they will. And it's going to be 12, 13-year-old culture. It'll be 5 and 6-year-old culture. It'll be you know, whatever it is, but it may not be the culture that's best for what we're talking about here. And we don't often hear conversations about that a lot, about the pre-work that goes into, you know, developing the academics. We a lot of times we jump into logistics, sentence frames, graphic organizers, word walls, all of those things, and they're all valuable, but that almost seems like the second layer on top of this classroom environment that I've built. You know, I tell students when we're doing things, because there's this, especially in seventh grade, there's this thing about being wrong. Like they don't want to be wrong, so they always ask me, even if we're doing warm-ups and it's something I haven't taught, is this right? And I said, I'd rather you be wrong and be able to explain why you did what you did than be right because I told you the answer. And I go, it's science. It's like there's no such thing as failure, just data. That's all there is. I can fix wrong answers. But if I have a safe community and I'm also honoring and recognizing and allow my students to come in with a language that they already use, if I'm doing those two things, like I'm off to a good start. Is that fair to say?
I used to ask my kids, like, okay, like they were working on something and I walk over and I go, okay, so what do you think you understand now? And what are questions you have? And they would answer, then they'd go, is that right? I'm like, is it what you understand? Then yes, that is the correct answer to that question. Is it a question you have? Then yes, that's the correct answer to the question. But yeah, and I just want to clarify, you know, this is something very special in the science classroom.
Mhm.
When we engage in literacy specific, like, you know, the literacy skills, the engagement with literature, that's a different space. So I don't want to say that there should be no grammar ever for children. It's just in the science classroom, we get to it, but we don't start with it. Because science really, we do have so many experiences that are individualized. They're my personal experiences from engaging in the world that we start with that because that's a much more productive place. And I can build language from it. I don't need language to enter.
Right. Makes sense. In the chat, it looks like Anna asked, she used to post English Spanish vocabulary words with pictures. Is this still okay? What
Yeah,
would you say to that?
absolutely. And so I think there's a difference, right? So sorry, my little speaker's dying. There's a difference between providing words and providing scaffold. So when you have developed, so for one thing, if it's a word that everybody is using and there's like 5 kids that aren't proficient in English, enough to know what those words are to engage in the activity, they're going to need some support. And so those are things where we tend to put on word walls, the words that you need to engage in the activity. But what they're often, but the like what we call tier 2 or tier 3 words, which are more technical, those we don't provide until the kids have the concept, and often they don't have that concept in any language. So you can, if you are in a dual immersion situation, and they are learning both languages, developing both languages, then yeah, I would put them both up. But I would be thoughtful about if that's not the case, and I just have English emerging multilinguals in the classroom, and I'm supporting their learning. If it's, I would be really I would be really thoughtful about what words I put up on the wall and what words I didn't. I
Makes
had a
sense.
word.
Yeah, I do too. And as we need the words, they come up. But the word wall is also always available for a reference point. I actually do have some laminated ones that are English and Spanish. I have a high population of students that are multilingual. But and we also know that the more proficient you become in your mother tongue, that helps you in your second language. And so it's like this biliteracy thing that's kind of also happening there too, um, which is really supportive of students. Uh, Go ahead,
Karen,
Susan.
Karen asked about why don't the vocabulary words come in both languages? I
Mm,
don't know. I don't know. I do know that in a lot of curriculum it often comes in Spanish because those are the, you know, we have a large number of Spanish speakers in the United States. But I think it depends on the demands of the market in a lot of cases, unfortunately.
Yeah, and then for me, I've been using, I mean, a lot of generative AI to do translations and things like that. Actually, even the text to speech has been great in some of the programs. But on the fly, if I have a student who maybe they're recently immigrated and I don't have things translated, I might find myself doing that, translating back and forth. And the next level to it is I actually started translating my videos. So I've been using artificial intelligence, recording myself in English, and then it dubs me in another language, and it also changes my mouth. So it looks like I'm pronouncing the words in Portuguese or Greek or Ukrainian. It looks like I'm actually speaking it. And so when I talk to people and I say, hey, would you listen to this? Like my friend who's German, he says, you sound like a proficient non-native speaker. And I said, that's the best it could get. Like that's the best it could get right there. And so when I record myself and put it on YouTube for my students, I can have multiple versions. And oh, this so can you tell me more about the AI dubbing? That's from a website called or a company called HeyGen. So if you type in HeyGen AI video generator, you can see that. So I'll maybe I'll drop it in the chat when we have a little lull. But I wanted to switch over and ask you. I know you work with a lot of schools who are implementing the things that we're talking about right now, and I wanted to ask where are you seeing some schools maybe getting it right or taking risks or trying new things? I know it can be kind of scary because there's high stakes testing and there's you're under a microscope and everything gets published on the state dashboard and there's so many things. And you know, education isn't really like known for its massive swings of innovation and risk taking, but I do know that there can be schools or districts that kind of do some neat things. What schools are what have you seen where places are people are getting it right in your opinion, or they're trying new things?
So you guys want to hear a story? Do you want to, just to be fully clear, my background, my family is Mexican American, and you cannot answer a question without a lot of context and story building and detail around it. So I have a hard time giving a brief story. You're going to hear a story. So we've been doing some work with the district, Norwalk La Mirada. It's a suburb of Los Angeles, mid-sized district. And they were concerned that by the time about their long-term English learners. So these are kids who have been in the system 6 or more years and still have not been reclassified as English proficient, which means they're not doing well in academics. They might have social language, but they haven't developed academic language. And and those students are required to take, I think it's a certain number of minutes for language development. Well, in a secondary multiple classroom a day schedule, that's a class. And so what was happening is that their middle school and high school ELs were not able to take any electives. And this district has some cool electives. I mean, besides music and art, they have robotics, and there's Femineers, which is a, girls engineering group, and they have Project Lead the Way, and they have all these really cool electives, and the kids weren't able to take them. They also were struggling to fulfill their college entrance requirements, which in California we call A through G. So they said, hey, they called, hey, Susan. And I said, yeah. Let me share my screen because I'll give you some background. And I'm going to need to skip a slide. So let me do that. Well, I'm just going to tell you because I cannot find that. It disappeared on me. I don't know if your Mac ever does this where it like sends it to a third screen.
Oh yeah, when I have my laptop, I swipe with my 3 fingers and it brings my windows back. But no, it likes to hide things from you too.
That's okay. I can multitask and find this. So what they did is there was a report, and you can find it. It was from Ed Trust West. It was published about 6 years ago now, and they actually did sort of a white paper on science as a lever for language development. And you have to read it really closely, but there are some research citations in the back of it, one of which was mine. And so I helped them think about what could this really look like. And that white paper was what Norwalk Lamarada looked at when they said, we think we want to do something different for our ELs. And this is unlocking learning. Science is a lever for English learner equity. And so the district really said, okay, well, how can we maximize the learning opportunities for these emerging multilinguals? How can we make sure that what we provide is quality English language development, but also full access to college requirements and all the curriculum? And they said, well, there seems to be something about science that might be the place that we can leverage. So I want to go back one. That's this is so Shay Fairchild, Brian Casey. Shay is the science specialist in Norwalk Lamarada. Brian's the ELD specialist, TOSA type. And then these three lovely ladies are teachers in the project. The enrollment, they're mid-sized district, high, more than half the kids are considered socially disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged, but they do not have a large number of English learners, not compared to some of the other districts in Los Angeles. So we're talking about a small number of students that the district said it's not okay that they don't have, that it is inequitable for these kids, and we need to do better. So they called us in and they said, we want ELD to be in science. We don't want it to be, we're not talking about access, like providing access to science. We want science to be the place that counts for English language development. And in California, we have integrated, which is where content takes more of a focus. And we have designated, where language takes more of the focus. They wanted to do both in science. So we engaged in, and we're now 2 years into the project. It required a lot of collaborative engagement in science learning experiences where we leveraged language, because the science teachers didn't know much about language, and the ELD teachers really were not. We did it with eighth grade in physics. Physics is a ninth grade course in this district. And so we did a lot of like, well, let's just play with some phenomena. If you notice that lovely chart, which again is some sort of a mirror reflecting, but that communicated a lot of information and there were no words on it, right? So how can we visually communicate? How can we expand the modalities? But we spent a lot of time together just playing in the science and language space to develop some agreements. So we developed a vision for what effective ELD and science teaching and learning would look like. What is the teacher doing? What is the student doing? What is happening in the classroom? There was a lot of conversations around what do we do with science text and science vocabulary. And then you can see in this last chart, really, this is an ELD standard in California, interpretive communication, reading closely and explaining ideas. What does that look like in ELD, and what does that look like in science? And how do we create this organic space in between the two to do them simultaneously?
What was the feedback from the teachers after they participated in this? What was that like?
So we've had a core group for 2 years. They first thought we were crazy, but they came in voluntarily. They said, this sounds crazy, but I know my kids aren't getting what they deserve. So, and initially we had to do a lot of trust building because it was scary for adults to say, I don't understand this physics that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And it was even scary for physics teachers to say, I don't know what you mean by, this word phrase, or, I don't know what you mean by a text structure or choral reading. So they both had expertise, but to do this work, they had to build a new expertise together. And that was really scary initially. And eventually, and so I would say the first year, we just really built community and built understanding.
This is between the ELD teachers and the science teachers.
Yep.
And when I look at this feels like a force multiplier. And what I mean by that is it's not 1 + 1. It's like if it was, it's like 1 + 1 = 3 as opposed to 2. If I was able to do this with my English teachers, I just feel like that would be so empowering. We'd be able to do so many kind of different things. We would both grow. But I do kind of like I empathize with the vulnerability of having to become a student and not know something when you spend your career as the expert in front of people for so long that there is a kind of like a humility you have to have if you're willing to go there. And I think as for anyone who leads this work, like there has to be an empathy and recognizing like that's a scary place to put someone into do. You've been teaching physics for a while, and then we're going to do this inquiry activity. Just like our kids, when teachers are in those positions, we feel the same feelings of vulnerability. So
Yeah,
I totally get
we
it.
did some collaborative teaching, and I'll talk about how they plan their lessons in a minute, but we did where we went, they collaboratively planned, they revised this whole course, they went in and we taught together. And I had like some of our language teachers like pull me aside and like quietly whisper in my ear, she's like, I never took physics in college. I don't completely understand what we're talking about. And I was like, you're a college educated adult who had a good night's sleep and breakfast. If you don't understand what just happened in that classroom, what do you think is going on with the 14 and 15-year-olds who had this conversation for an hour? Like if it doesn't make sense to us as adults, it's not going to make sense to kids. And that was kind of a freeing space to say, feel free to say, I don't understand this. Kids aren't going to understand it. If you notice, I said this is not necessarily generalizable. So please don't feel like you can take this and run with it, because we did a lot of community building and understanding of both areas before we started. And this is what the teachers decided worked for them. There
Susan,
are,
can I jump in real quick? Because there's something that you're doing that I just see a parallel with. We just talked about the importance of doing trying to get to a place where our students are comfortable communicating their science knowledge. And we talk about the value of doing this pre-work with the community connection, all of that safe environment. That's exactly the same as it is with teachers. Like if we want teachers to co-plan and we want teachers to do interdisciplinary work or to lean into each other's areas that are uncomfortable, we need that just as much as our kids do.
100%.
Okay, I just want to call that out.
Yeah, no, yes. People I work with for a long time say, yeah, everything you do is exactly the same. There's a pattern to everything I do, and you just named it. So what they decided were the steps is they were going to take the existing science lesson. They were going to read through it together, and they were going to look for language opportunities. Where are kids talking? Where are kids writing? Where are kids reading? Like where is the language in the lesson already? Then we're going to go over to the ELD standards and say, well, which one of these can we leverage in those spaces? So we started with the science, just to be clear. This planning starts with the science storyline. And then we're like, okay, so this is what we think, but we know language and science is driven by the science and engineering practices. Every practice that kids engage with involves some sort of either gaining, developing, or communicating ideas. So that's where language lives. That's your easy lift. So, well, let's look at the SCPs. Let's look at the science and engineering practices. What is the language that they're requiring? Does that match the ELD that we've identified? Great. Now we're going to make a language target task. What language are kids using? Why are they using it? And what science ideas are they using it with? And then we went in and actually expanded the lesson itself. They also developed some like templates. If you'll notice, this is what I was talking about. They identified the dimensionality of the lesson. They then said, well, what is the designated and integrated objectives? Really, we were looking for like the interactive flavor of ELD, and then the more language specific. And then this got mapped out across. Then it even said, well, where are we in the storyline? Because remember I said storyline's important. How sophisticated are the ideas as we build language? You'll see vocabulary. There was probably exponentially more vocabulary in these lessons when we started. The teachers really streamlined and said, what are the science terms that are really necessary? And then we really built the ELD targets and designated ELD. So I just want to say the one important thing that came out is an expansion of language, that everybody was sort of thinking about language in their own kind of silo.
Mhm.
And we really worked hard to expand what language meant, the modalities of language, that they are gestures, that I'm a grunter. I communicate really well with just grunts. Images, I gesture a lot. Manipulating materials, all of these things are ways of communicating scientific ideas, and we worked hard to create spaces in the classrooms where kids had opportunities to use language in a much bigger way than they ever had in either classroom alone.
And Susan, I want to circle back and say this work, we're seeing like the product, but you said this took quite a bit of time to build the culture between teachers before they were able to get to this point.
2 years.
2 years. So if anybody who's thinking about kind of doing something like this, knowing that this is a longer, kind of like a longer process of laying the groundwork and then building it up, and also having grace on yourself of knowing like this is probably not like a PD that we're going to do after school one day and then all of a sudden we have it. I mean, if you already got that culture, like awesome, but there's some groundwork that has to be laid. I'm thinking.
Yep.
Aaron said something in the chat, and I'm biased, but I have to call it out because it's amazing. She says, interest in such a connection here. Kids learn faster if they're interested, all caps, in a subject. Science is a perfect medium for that. Almost all grades. I'm gonna say all grades. Aaron, I'm gonna double down on what you said, and we're preaching to the choir here, and 100% absolutely. Everything that our students really experience in life, there's some kind of science connection. And I've been, no pun intended, and I've been trying to figure out ways strategically to bridge this gap. So lo and behold, like here's where I'm at right now with this. I pull up the NGSS standards, and you know what I don't really pay attention to often is the connection to Common Core below, because it doesn't really like matter that much to my day to day. But you know what I did is I talked to my math and English team, and I said, "Hey, do you guys teach these standards? These are woven into what I'm teaching." And a lot of teachers are struggling just with like grade level content. Like I'm trying to teach 7th grade math and we're at 4th grade. Like that's where we're at right now. And those things are woven into our standards. There's already the work has been done for this cross curricular work. And many teachers have actually never seen our standards. So if you just pull up NGSS, scroll down, to the bottom of like the SEPs, disciplinary core ideas, pink, blue, and orange, and then look at those Common Core and show those to your team, you can already see the overlap. And then that's a good starting point for conversations. Hey, where we both hit the standard. There could be some overlap.
And I'm going to shout out Escondido, K-8 school district in California. We had a project there that was middle school math, science, and ELA teachers, ELA social studies. And that was fascinating to say, how can we leverage the critical thinking of students that we share? So they developed collaborative project-based learning units. And sometimes it started in math, sometimes it started in language, sometimes it started in science, but they brought their expertise to the students, so that the students didn't, I mean, if you think about it, the kids go to 5 or 6 classes a day, and every class, I mean, science and math use different letters for the same variables sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about argumentation in science, and we mean it to mean to engage in discussions for consensus. ELA means something totally different. They talk about evidence. The value of evidence, the criteria for evidence is based on the author. And we talk about evidence as often this empirical thing that is based off of methodology and to evaluate it, right? So we use the same words, and the kids are just going from room to room trying to make sense of it. And we rarely provide a crosswalk for them so that they can really leverage learning in one space and bring it over to the other. And then what do? As teachers, we're like, I just talked about this yesterday and they don't remember anything. Well, no, of course they don't remember anything. Do you know how many things happened to them between yesterday and today? You've been teaching this lesson for 6 times, 6 times today. So I think we also need to give our kids some grace and really recognize what's happening to them when they're not in our classrooms.
You know, I find that when we do interdisciplinary units or when students see the same content in a different place, I could almost see their cognitive load decrease, because you're right. Like, I'm talking about something multiple times, but they're going to 6 different teachers, 6 different styles. But what if I was teaching a science in the nonfiction reading, which is, I think, 50% by like 4th grade for Common Core and 70% by high school. I would love just to hand over, hey, here are the articles I have. I have all the articles you can read right here. And you know what? I'm actually teaching this in science. So if you help them access the content, I'll teach them the content and the skills, and they'll be able to see the same thing in 2 different places, and they'll appreciate it. Or they'll write a CER in my class for a scientific argument. But you know what? I'm not really paying attention to the writing mechanics. I just am looking at, do you have some kind of evidence? And then go take that essay over to English and then remix it and rework it, instead of writing a completely new one on a totally different subject. Now you'll see students become more engaged. And this often helps break down the barrier too, I've noticed, with, well, science is just fun. Cool. I'll share the fun. Like, here's the fun. Go ahead and take it and do it with your kids. And when you were talking about the words, I was thinking things like plate that you eat off of, and then plate tectonics, or cell phone, tissue, something I sneeze in, organ, and an instrument. I think Susan in Science of Reading podcast talked about spring, like the bouncy thing versus the season versus jump. We think that, we think because we say a word that it's the same word that people hear in their head, but I know it's not the case for me.
I used to, so I'm now a retired university professor, and I was in a college of natural sciences, and I often would tell my, what we call discipline faculty, because I was a science education faculty, was that often that kids that are doing well in their classrooms or seem to understand what they're saying better than most probably had very similar experiences as them. And the farther they get from the experience of the student to their own experience, the less likely that the cognitive frame that they're using to think about things is going to work for them. So my kids used to tell me all the time, why don't you just tell me? Or I would hear them like, you can ask her, but she's not going to tell you. Right. And I used to say, because my explanation is just that. It's mine and it's useful to me, but it's not useful to you unless I help you build your own.
Yeah. Susan, I know as we run kind of closer to on time, did you have any other things that you had or wanted to highlight?
Yeah, let me just do a brief. I'm not going to talk quickly because this is a science and literacy thing, and we know that doesn't work. But I often I co-developed this image with a colleague of mine, Claudio Vargas from SciLearning, and we use it to kind of show this is what's happening with kids and language and science. They have ideas in their head, and they make sense of those ideas and new experiences, but they do that in part by communicating ideas with others. And when I communicate my ideas with others, I get feedback on the idea, but I also get feedback on the language. If what I say makes sense outside my head. And that's really, really important. If you have not checked out the consensus study from the National Academies, English learners in STEM subjects, they talk more than just about English learners. They really talk about literacy, but they really kind of nail some of the shifts. We talked about vocabulary a lot. One of the shifts is from research is saying it's not vocabulary. When we talk about language, there are all the disciplinary practices around the way scientists use language that we really need to attend to. We used to wait until kids had English in order to learn science, so we saw it as a precursor. And now we're really starting to see that language emerges from learning experiences. So it's a product of learning, not a prerequisite. And I kind of showed you in the Norwalk example, we really need to kind of merge the language and science objectives so that we're really thinking about a more functional use of language within the discipline rather than language here and science here. And again, I remember being told, lower the cognitive load. If the concept is complicated, make the language simple. And we're no longer saying that. We're saying make the language bigger, make more options in language, expand language, but you keep the content where the content needs to be. And then I'll just sort of end with, there really is something special about science. There's something special about science and language development, especially for populations historically marginalized. Somebody said it in the chat, and if I could see it, I would say your name, but science, we are naturally curious about science. There are multiple science channels. There are science magazines. There's a science fiction genre. We find it interesting, and that interest will cause us to leap over any limitations we have in our own language or literacy in order to engage with it. Kids will read more complex texts than they typically do. English learners will speak in whatever language they got in order to talk about what's happening at the table. So that's important. We all have prior science knowledge that we bring to the classroom, and we can use that to build knowledge, and it is not language dependent. I don't have to give it to the kids. They already have it. And then the other really beautiful thing, this was true before the NRC framework, and it's even more true now. Science is language intensive. It is ripe with rich language opportunities about things that kids are curious about, that they already have some knowledge about. And you cannot shortchange how special that is for language development and literacy development. And that's it. I'm off my soapbox.
If there was a collection, I would put money into it right now, and then I would stay afterwards for the song. So that was great. And you're getting a lot of shout outs and love in the chat too. So that was awesome. And it says, thank you for your enthusiasm. I sound like a nerd when I try to explain this to my colleagues. It's hard to change the culture at some schools. And I agree with you. One of my mentors said something to me. They said, bloom where you're planted. And it's one of the reasons why I stay in the classroom and don't go outside to other positions in education, because where I feel like I have the most impact is inside the classroom. And I know that's my locus of control. That's what I can change and implement real change there, and it really matters. And so those of you in the classroom, keep doing what you're doing. Those of you who are administrators and leaders, teachers need the time, they need the structure, they need the support. As Susan was saying, they need the community and the safety to go there, but they also need logistically, they need the time to plan it, because they're taking care of kids all day. So if you have PD schedules and things like that, allow teachers to have time to co-plan and really get this off the ground. When it's grassroots and it's organic and teachers believe in it, they just need the time to make it work. If you can make that happen for the teachers, I know that they'll show up for you, and so will your students. Susan, you're amazing. Thank you for being here again and sharing about all the work that you've done and how we could support our students. I know as I sit here and listen, I selfishly, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go do this stuff tomorrow. I'm gonna improve it. And those of you who were able to be here with us in the chat, thank you. We have a few minutes, so if there's any questions that you want to ask, please feel free to drop in a question. We'll hang out for a little bit just to see if there's anything there, and then check in with Ryan. Ryan, if there's any things that you have or want to add before we close out.
Yeah, so I will just go ahead and share a few quick free resources for everybody while people drop some things in the chat if they have anything that they would like the two of you to answer. If you are interested in learning more about integrating science and literacy, check out our free resource bundle for integrating science and literacy at amplify.com/science-literacy-bundle. If you want to learn more about Amplify Science, go ahead and head over to amplify.com/science. And if you're a current Amplify Science user, feel free to join our Facebook community. We always have a ton of great stuff going on in there, great stories, great advice, great resources. So make sure you join that community if you are an Amplify Science user at facebook.com/groups/Amplify Science community. And with that, I'm looking through the chat. Was
There
there
was one
questions?
question about contacting Eric or myself, and I don't know how you guys do that, other than typing my email in the chat.
Socials? You have are you on what's that? What's it called? Social X? I don't know. Do you have any public
I
socials?
am. As a matter of fact, if you can find on the new Twitter. And if you're like, is that Susan? If it looks like somebody in a shark head, that is in fact me.
And that's my social in the chat, SD Teaching, Instagram, and on X. It may not seem like I'm super active on it, but I do check messages and I do kind of scroll. It's my own kind of balance between social media and staying connected to the world. So I'm not completely off grid, but I do have those things there. Ryan, I think they want to take a screenshot. Steph want to take a screenshot of that slide. If you could,
Yep.
there we go.
Is it back
Here's
up there? Okay. Well, the two of you are absolutely incredible. Not
That
that
was
I
fun.
had
Went by fast.
It was so
any
much fun.
doubts. No, it was fun. I really enjoyed listening to the two of you. Always do.
All right. Well, thank
All
you.
right.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Susan, Eric.
Thanks.
have a great rest
Thanks,
of your day.
everyone. Teachers, have a great rest of the week. Susan, you're awesome. Thanks for being here again. Ryan, it was good seeing you.
Good to see you as always, Eric. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.